futures are in contango, what that means is the futures is an upward sloping curve. And if you buy a 1 month Bitcoin future and it continues to roll down the curve, meaning the 1 month out price is higher than the current spot price, the Bitcoin ETF is basically bleeding that value on the futures curve. And that's not the ideal exposure for someone who wants ETF exposure to Bitcoin. So you can do it in Canada, you can't do it in the US yet. But let's talk about how big those ETFs are in Canada on a relative basis. And if you use the rule of 10 to 1, which is typically the Canadian population, Canadian GDP, and Canadian market caps, you'll see that the future for ETFs in the US, spot ETFs, is very bright. And that's how a lot of big institutions are going to be comfortable getting their Bitcoin exposure. A lot of people will say, not your keys, not your coins. These institutions need to get their head around custody, around facilitating their own systems, as you said. So I grew up in the hedge fund industry. We never used that much leverage, but leverage is beneficial when markets are going your way and very unbeneficial when leverage is unwinding and people are asking for a capital payback. Leverage is a double-edged sword, whether you're at a hedge fund or if you're doing it on a personal basis. But remember this, and the physical versus the equity, not derivatives, but equity plays as well. Bitcoin mining is a very difficult business in the long term because you don't control your input costs, which are energy, and you don't control your revenue or your output price because that's set by the open market. That's a very different business model than other businesses out there. And it's my belief and the belief of the company that I'm involved in Canada that you're going to want to have vertical exposure to the Bitcoin mining function. You're going to want to be an energy company that mines Bitcoin and then distributes Bitcoin into the various platforms of the world, whether they're ETFs, whether they're Bitcoin lending companies, the Coinbase platforms, the Sat Streets. Sat Street's a private company in Canada that's a Bitcoin exchange. Even the IBEX guys, okay? IBEX Mercado belongs in what's called the top of the funnel vertical that I'm laying out. And it's my chance to again call out my friends in South America, well, Central America to be exact, originally from Guatemala, but working to implement the merchant solution in El Salvador for the Chivo wallet. They've got, I've made a personal investment in their company, or to be honest, a commitment to make a personal investment at a market valuation that is so friggin' attractive for me, Greg Foss, that I see value in all different parts of the ecosystem in a vertical, not just Bitcoin mining, not just energy providing miners or energy to Bitcoin miners, but a slice of a vertical that takes the molecule from the ground, digital energy, or excuse me, natural resource energy molecule from the ground, CH4, turns it into digital energy called Bitcoin and distributes that beautiful solution to the world. And you can get a piece of that in a common stock. Do that. And it's going to be very exciting for the big funds in the world that can't get their head around owning the physical, but want an exposure from soup to nuts. So lots of cool things happening in Canada. Michael, you've nailed it once again. There's so many restrictions that require people to play stupid games. Rather than getting exposure to the physical, they have to jump through hoops to get exposure to some smaller cap derivative type of exposure. Over time, this will become more efficient as the education process increases.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the Bitcoin mining industry is fascinating, and there's going to be a lot of different strategies, and there's a lot of dynamic, decentralized innovation going on. And so the most exciting thing is just to unleash the entrepreneurial creativity. I think, I just talked a little bit about why I thought securities were good for the ecosystem, but I'm going to actually swap back to discuss property. I think that one thing that we need to do is we need to go educate the entire world on the benefits of holding property as opposed to a security, and that what I mean by that is that if I had a building in Vegas and I owned the entire building outright, and I was the property owner, I could put a lien on it, I could put a mortgage on it, I could lease it out, I could develop it and upgrade it, and I could sell it. Those are my property rights. But if I was an individual, middle class investor, I would have to buy a share in a REIT, and I would be a security holder, and maybe they sell 1,000 shares, and I own 1,000th of the building, and I have this limited partnership in the cash flows of the building, but I don't have the right to lien it, mortgage it, sell it, develop it, or lease it. I don't have property rights. I have security rights. And up until Bitcoin, only the rich that were well organized could actually own property as an investment long term. And the real state change of Bitcoin is that now you can have $387 of digital property, and you own the same property rights as an Uber driver, as a billionaire would have. And so one of these fundamental things that's happening is, once you understand that Bitcoin is not just digital gold, it's digital property. And what's the difference? Gold you can't lease, and gold you can't mortgage, and and gold can't really be developed to be upgraded, and you would never put a lien on gold. So when you decide you want $1 billion of
Did we lose
property
Saylor?
of a building, sorry, hello, can you hear me?
I still hear you, Michael.
Yeah, I can hear you
Yeah.
great. You're good.
Okay, great. So what I was saying is the metaphor of digital property is much more powerful. Digital gold takes you to a 10 trillion or $20 trillion market cap. Digital property takes you to 100 trillion or $200 trillion or more addressable market, because you can lease and mortgage and develop and lien. And if you understand Bitcoin is the dematerialization of property, then you realize when you put your Bitcoin into an application, when you give it to someone else, you're kind of putting a lien on it. When you loan it, right, you're leasing it. When you borrow against it, you're mortgaging it. And this is the first property that you can buy in quantity: $1,000, $100, $10, $1, $1,000,000, $10,000,000, 100,000,000, a billion, or 10 billion. Everybody pretty much has exactly the same property rights. And I think that, when I finish with my suggestion that it's good to own securities that have Bitcoin exposure, I then flip and I say it's really good to own the property. The reason that MicroStrategy didn't buy an ETF or didn't buy a fund, and the reason that we bought the Bitcoin is really a couple of things. One, we wanted the property rights so that we could transfer the property to different counterparties without a taxable event, and that's a pretty big deal. And the second is, all publicly traded companies are limited to having no more than 40% of their balance sheet in securities, and you run into a hard SEC 40 Act where you become an investment company when you have more than 40%. So Bitcoin as digital property is profound, because it really could sit on a balance sheet like a treasury instrument or like cash, and ETFs never will, and stocks and securities never will unless they change the law. And the other reason it's profound is because 8 billion people can have exactly the same legal theoretical property rights that the Renaissance organization or a $20 billion property development company has. And once you get that idea through your head, then you realize that you just want to keep buying this stuff as much as possible, because the last point, of course, in addition to having property, you've got property in cyberspace, which means that anybody with a mobile phone application or a website might want to borrow your property or use your property to fuel their application. And that's where I go to my final metaphor, which is digital gold is just a block of monetary energy that's in a basement. Digital property is a building or a structure that people are actually using that generates yield. And digital energy is when I just dematerialize that entire thing and I vibrate at 60 megahertz, where I split it into a million parts, send it to a million places, fetch it back every 5 seconds. And you can see where digital energy could be used in social networks or trading applications, or any kind of financial applications. You could build it into cars and build it into anything. And all of those aspects are incredibly powerful things. They're options that you get when you own the property. But if you own the security, then you're just limited as a limited partner, and the general partner that actually controls the property has to decide to do those things. And they may choose not to do those things ever, right? Like the frustration of I own a share in a building in Vegas, and I get paid $1 a year in rent, and I can actually find a person that'll pay me $100 million a year, but the general partner doesn't want to lease it to them, or they're in a different city, and so they don't want to move the building, or they can't move the building. So I think, Bitcoin is digital property. When investors start to realize that, it's it's so profound as to take us from $1 trillion of addressable market to 10 trillion to 100 trillion to 500 trillion, and it becomes you know half of everything. Now, what is perfect monetary energy, or what is perfect energy? It's money, right? So digital money is digital energy, and the matter, instantiation, the static instantiation of money is property, and the slowest instantiation, the approximation of it once upon a time, was gold. And we're at a renaissance right now. So I guess my summary here is we got to educate the world on this. And there's no right and wrong. I don't want to come across as loving securities and not liking the property. The truth is, I love it all, and I think that everything is happening at the same time to the benefit of the entire ecosystem.
Good Lord, I could not add anything to that. I think it's beautiful. So nothing to add. I love your total addressable market thesis. I want to just add, when I say nothing to add, I want to segue into something I believe strongly, that Vlad Putin is currently trying to figure out how to price his oil and natural gas in Bitcoin, because digital energy for beautiful natural resource energy, and now your property rights angle. So when Bitcoin, when oil and natural gas is priced in Bitcoin, Bitcoin will become the de facto reserve asset of the world. And yes, I agree, we get to the tens of trillions easily, the 50s of trillions easily. And in fact, that's when you get to Bitcoin prices in today's dollars of well over $2 to $5 million of Bitcoin. Um, well said, Michael. Nothing more to
You
add
know,
except for the optionality of pricing energy in Bitcoin. It's coming
so
sooner than you
well,
think.
so I have an opinion on that. I think that sometimes we get too excited about competing with currencies like the dollar, and I don't think we need to. For example, uh, people ask me, "Am I going to price my software in Bitcoin?" And the answer is no. I'm going to sell it in dollars, but I convert all of the money that I earn into Bitcoin, and Putin could sell all of his oil in dollars and just convert the reserves into Bitcoin, and so could anybody else. My advice to anybody would be, if you're running a business and people are trading with you in a currency, if you're in China, you trade in CNY, and then if you can convert that into BTC, you do that. If you're in Argentina and you got to trade in pesos, you convert the pesos into BTC, right? If someone wants to trade with you in a certain currency, you trade with them. But some people say, pay me in Bitcoin. Well, it's good to be paid in Bitcoin, but you can also get paid in dollars and immediately convert it to Bitcoin,
Yeah, a
right?
hundred percent, 100%. Except that it involves one more middleman, and understand that that middleman is generally a bank that's taking a lot of vig out of your trade. But to eliminate that, I agree, because think of Bitcoin as being your savings account and your fiat currency account being your checking account. I agree with you 100%. You need fiat currencies because they eliminate the need for barter. So treat your checking account or your fiat currency account like your checking account. This is what Nick Szabo says. And treat your savings account or your Bitcoin as your savings account. You can have a dual system, a parallel system that will enrich the United States if they embrace this beautiful technology. So you'll have the US fiat reserve currency, and you'll have the US controlling and owning most of the reserve asset of the world called Bitcoin. How you get there? Is there a middleman switching fiat currency into Bitcoin? Doesn't matter to me, Michael. At the end of the day, it's your closed thermodynamic loop where it's the rule of conservation of energy. So, yeah, next subject. I think this whole thing about digital property. I need to buy more Bitcoin. That's all I know.
I think, yeah, I think it's a good segue to stablecoins and the entire stablecoin discussion this week. And I think that what's very clear, if you've read that report, and I read every word of it. What's very clear is that the regulators have embraced Bitcoin, and they've embraced the idea of stable coins moving at the speed of light over crypto rails. So I think that those are two good things. I think that it's also interesting that we've got about $130 billion of stable coins right now, and it's going to go one of two ways: either they shut it down, or they provide a compliant path. And their intention is to provide a compliant path. And so I read this as it's a green light for banks to start to handle stable coins. And if you pair the stablecoin report with the words of Helena McWilliams, who's the chair of the FDIC, who said in the same week, she said, "I think that we need to allow banks in this space while appropriately managing and mitigating risk." What I see a whole host of regulators. I mean, the president's report was driven by the White House with the cooperation of the CFTC, the SEC, Treasury, and they even consulted with three other agencies, and they talk to everybody under the sun. What I read into this is there's a green light or an intention to allow banks to issue stable coins, and there's also an intention to allow banks to hold Bitcoin. And if they actually work out that transparency, there's no reason why stable coins won't grow from 130 billion to a trillion to 10 trillion. And this would be the US dollar moving as a stable coin everywhere in the world. And there's no reason why we wouldn't see an explosion in adoption of Bitcoin as a reserve asset at the same time, because the only thing that's holding back Bitcoin or stablecoin usage is people say Bitcoin, it might be banned, it's going to zero. And stablecoin, maybe there'll be a rug pull and there'll be a run on the bank, and I can't trust them. And the result is large corporations and large institutions aren't using these for the corporate treasury remittance use case or for just general broad-based payments. So either both things have to go to zero, or Bitcoin's going to $1 million a coin, and stable coins are going from 100 billion to a trillion and beyond. It's one or the other. And the big question is, how does the United States regulatory apparatus feel about it? And what I saw in the last 2 weeks is that they feel that Satoshi's innovation is real, Bitcoin is property, and there is a place for stable U.S. dollars. And so what I see the function of money bifurcating into a medium of exchange, which is going to be the U.S. dollar, and a store of value, which is going to be Bitcoin. And I see 8 billion people on the planet, and 1.5 billion are behind the China curtain, and they're living with CNY, and they may or may not be allowed to move and store Bitcoin, they may be stuck or locked out of that. But the other 6 billion people on the planet, they would love to get their hands on dollars, and they'd love to get their hands on Bitcoin. And there's 100 million companies that would trade in dollars, and millions of accounting systems wired for dollars. So, although some people think it's common in the community to think, well, it's Bitcoin versus the dollar. It's not Bitcoin versus the dollar. The war is Bitcoin versus gold, and Bitcoin versus index funds, and Bitcoin versus low quality assets, and Bitcoin versus property that's been monetized and cost twice as much as you want to pay for it. The war is against weak assets, and Bitcoin is going to demonetize $100 trillion of them next. And on the other side, the real war is USD versus CNY. I mean, we have to have a currency, and as long as there's a government of China, and as long as there's a government of the U.S. mandates that you pay tax when you transfer property, but you can transfer currency tax free. The Chinese government does the same thing. So what we have is a situation where, you know, as long as there is a national government, as long as there's an EU or a US dollar or China, there's going to be a currency. But what I see is 66 countries have dollarized. There's 130 currencies, according to Wikipedia, 130 floating currencies. And maybe the world only needs two of them, Greg. Maybe, I mean, at the end of the day, instead of thinking, Bitcoin is a, counted a dollar, a different way to view this is the US dollar on a stable coin could serve 6 billion people as the medium of exchange. It'll probably crash the bottom 100 currencies. And you'll see every week currency in the Western sphere of influence will be dollarized on stable coins if they put this through, if we work this out. And all those people, of course, you're going to hold bolivars for a day. You're going to hold pesos for a week. You're going to hold U.S. dollars for a few months, and you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 5% of your money in their checking account that's stable coins, and then you're going to want to move the rest into a Bitcoin as a store of value. And of course, you've got against that 30 years of institutional inertia where you've got all sorts of institutions and funds that they have to allocate to certain asset classes even 5 years after it's obvious they shouldn't be. The fact that anybody's allocating to gold 10 years after it stopped working is testament to institutional inertia in that regard. So I think ultimately there's one more comment here. I think that the crypto community views this report with trepidation because it's going to bring regulation to DeFi, regulation to stablecoin, and regulation to security tokens. And we can see that writing on the wall. But I think that the rest of the world and the institutions, the corporations, the banks, and all of the large institutional investors will see the exact opposite in time. Their view is going to be, now maybe Microsoft can move $10 billion cross borders with a stable coin, or Amazon can move $10 billion back and forth. So whereas you're going to have two interpretations, the interpretation, of the crypto community is going to be, slightly biased negative, but the interpretation of the large institutions for this is really strongly biased positive. And the conclusion is, if we move forward, the US dollar can actually emerge as the world reserve digital currency. It can be the currency on 6 billion smartphones used every minute of the day. And Bitcoin is going to be the world reserve digital asset, the strongest store of value. And everything's just going according to plan. It couldn't really be better as far as I can see. You have any reaction to that? And maybe
Yeah.
there are other people in the audience that
Well,
you guys
say
on Bitcoin Magazine want to call up to talk about it because it's the news of the week.
well, Michael, can I just say one thing before we call up anyone else?
Yeah.
Once again, you've done your homework before anyone else has, or certainly I love this. I wanted to say yes. All of those other currencies that are at risk are going to fail anyway. Okay, of the 180 fiats that are in the world, the U.S. dollar, if they don't get their act together, will be the last fiat to fail. So everyone else will fail before that, and that's called contagion, and that's what credit markets fear the most. But let's take a step back at something you mentioned and war on index funds. So some news of the day that I focus on is a guy that goes long, short different securities or positions. I've been calling to be short Western Union stock as a pocket trade for a while now. And today they just came out with forward guidance that actually looks pretty ugly, and all the analysts on Wall Street run to adjust their price targets down. The biggest owners of Western Union, which is a failing business because of all the payment rails and Bitcoin that we know, um, are the index funds BlackRock and Vanguard that own it because it has a weighting in the S&P 500. That in itself is poor asset allocation, but people run to the index funds
Yeah, it's
because they want
inertia,
exposure
right?
to the asset class called equities, and that equity, Western Union, is in the S&P 500. Well, look, Western Union is baked. Okay, it should be a core short position. In my opinion, this is not financial advice, but what it does blend into is the more what you're bringing out, the efficient allocation of capital, and that's what we are striving for above all else, is a return to free market pricing of risk and capital allocation. So I love your thesis. Again, it's the checking account and the savings account. And yes, the USA has been served a gift from China. And it's my sincere hope as a Canadian that the USA succeeds in embracing this beautiful technology and leading the free world to its rightful conclusion, which is a store of value based on math and code. So well said. And at this point, I wanted just to say one thing. I actually had talked to Natalie Brunel about potentially coming up on stage. But before we go there, I know that we have like Dylan LeClaire and some guys from Bitcoin Magazine that I respect hugely as well. So Dylan, young kid, young gun, it's rewriting finance. So open over to you, Michael. But just want to call out those people as people that have influenced me and my belief in this ecosystem and Bitcoin community that I continue to learn day after day from.
Yeah, I guess I leave it to the Bitcoin Magazine host to, if you want to bring up anybody up on stage and rifle through a bunch of questions or comments, we can. I just end my one thought, which is if Bitcoin is part of the Western technology stack, then the US dollar in the next decade is a winner, and the losers are going to be every other currency. And, and that's a very interesting insight. Just like when a company puts Bitcoin on its balance sheet, the company's stock becomes a Bitcoin derivative. If the United States puts Bitcoin on its balance sheet, which it does indirectly because all the companies in the US are holding it, then the US dollar becomes a Bitcoin derivative. And you want to be really aggressive, right? I think someone pointed this out. The first company to print, or sorry, the first country to print its own currency and buy Bitcoin with it, right? And El Salvador, they can't do this because they don't have their own currency. But if Turkey or somebody else that did print a currency, if they just started printing their currency to buy Bitcoin and they flipped their balance sheet, then they would start to become a Bitcoin derivative. And now you're jacked into something going up 170% a year instead of sitting on reserve assets that are dollars that are losing 20% of their power a year. So there's extraordinary geopolitical opportunity here, and there's extraordinary corporate opportunity. Every company can decide, whether they want to plug their P&L into Bitcoin or plug their balance sheet into Bitcoin and how they add value. And I don't think it's obvious what the answer is. I mean, there's a lot of technical execution, a lot of strategy. But one thing that I am sure of is, like, in my entire life, I don't think I ever saw an opportunity that is just compelling. We're talking about the complete and utter digital transformation of the concept of energy, the concept of property, the concept of money. And I guess I'll end with like a great shout out to our man Jason Lowry, who turned the world upside down with a sketch on a cocktail napkin, where he reminded everybody that the entire military apparatus of the world is meant to protect property rights. And if half of that money, our monetary value, flows into a synthesized digital asset, and we started using electricity and proof of work to defend the property rights, we could dramatically shrink and decrease the exposure we have to defending the physical property. So, okay, so I'll shut up there.
Shout out here to Jason Lowry as well, Michael. I've had dinner with him. Myself and Peter McCormick were in Boston and had dinner with Jason. What an exceptional young man that is every word and every bit as honest in person as he comes across to me anyway, as a Bitcoin supporter. So shout out to a young kid, 24 years old, that is also going to change the world. So hopefully we can hear from Dylan LeClaire, another young man who's working hard to change the world, and anyone else you want to bring on stage, CK.
Yeah, sure.
Hey guys, it's Dylan speaking. Michael, I was just going to ask you, in regards to MicroStrategy's capital allocation, is the plan essentially just with Bitcoin as collateral? As it continues to monetize from a $1 trillion asset to a $5 to a $10 trillion asset, anytime there is just kind of some volatility spike or liquidation event in the legacy markets, is it essentially just your guys' plan to just kind of lever up in a way that you find to be, I guess, risk reward attractive, and just continue to do that the whole way?
I mean, right now we've got about $6 billion of unpledged collateral. So we've got $6 billion of assets. We're not generating yield on it, and we're not borrowing against it. It indirectly supports the equity and the converts, but and then we've got $1 billion of pledged collateral against a $500 million loan, right? So if you look at what we think the future is, right? I mean, I think the future is Bitcoin goes from $1 trillion to $2 trillion to $5 trillion to $10 trillion to $20 trillion to $40 trillion to $80 trillion to $160 trillion to $300 trillion to $500 trillion, and maybe to is it a quadrillion? I guess 1,000 trillion, right? That's the direction I see with volatility, and I think the question of what are we going to do, the basic answer is whoever owns the most Bitcoin at the end wins, right? So you got to keep acquiring Bitcoin, and by any means you can. And as a public company, the question for us is just what's accretive. So you could do it with cash flows. So we're a synthetic miner. If we generate 100 million in cash flow and we buy Bitcoin, it's the same as mining 100 million in Bitcoin a year, right? So we're doing that. You can also do it by mixtures of either equity offerings, but only if you're the equity is going to be a premium, right? If the equity is priced at a point where it would be creative to issue equity, then makes sense. But if the equity is priced oddly against the Bitcoin, it would be diluted. So I have to always consider, is that accretive or dilutive?
And you did that earlier in the year, correct?
We sold
you had that
$400
billion-dollar
million.
facility?
We sold $400 million worth of equity, and we bought Bitcoin, but we sold the equity like $720 a share, and we bought the Bitcoin at $45,000 a share, right? So it all depends, and we're always reconsidering that. The third way to do it is we could refinance some of our existing debt, right? I mean, if you got $1 billion pledged against a $500 million note, if I refinanced it, maybe I could refinance it down or refinance it up or something, right? A fourth way is, you could issue more converts if the market was right for that. And of course, the convert market's different than the junk market. A fifth way would be to establish credit lines against your $6 billion in collateral. A sixth way would be to issue debt against the asset, against the collateral itself. And that hasn't been done yet, but at some point in the future, I expect there will be asset-backed bonds that are backed by Bitcoin. A seventh way would be to contribute the Bitcoin into some yield bearing account and generate yield off it, right? And there are people that would pay me yield on it if I felt good with the counterparty risk. And an eighth way might be, remember what I talked about property? I said you can mortgage it, you can sell it, you can lean it up. Well, with Bitcoin, you could lean it up. Leaning it up meaning you give a slice of it in some context to some application to use in return for some consideration. And I think it's outside of the scope of our spaces here. But suffice it to say that if I have $6 billion or $7 billion of digital energy and it's currently generating me no yield, right? There's all sorts of different ways to generate some return on it and then to take that return and invest that back into more Bitcoin. So how do I decide what to do? Counterparty risk, market arbitrage. How many markets do I have here? Dylan, like I got the options market, the converts market, the Bitcoin futures market. I got lots of things. So the market arbitrage, the counterparty risk, the applications, the proposals, the debt markets. And, I'm not going to tell you what we're going to do because I guarantee you I'll do something that'll surprise you. And if it doesn't work, I won't do it. I'll do something different. And it all requires a lot of analysis and a lot of prudent thought to step your way through it. But, a year ago, we in essence sold equity at $140 a share to buy Bitcoin. That's the Dutch auction. Then we did a convert at $398 strike to buy Bitcoin. Then we did a convert at $1,432 strike to buy Bitcoin. Then we did a junk bond to buy Bitcoin. Then we generated a bunch of cash flow to buy Bitcoin. Then we did an ATM and we sold some equity to buy Bitcoin. Then we sold some more software and bought some more Bitcoin. What's next?
So what you're telling me is it's a pretty good bet to borrow 500 million and buy Bitcoin at 37,000 when your break even is 57,000 in 2028.
Yeah, I asked everybody on Twitter. I got a lot of harassment from the trolls when I did that, but I asked everybody on Twitter and I said, "Do you think that Bitcoin's going to go up more than 6% over the next 7 years?" And it's 91% consensus. Everybody thinks, right? So if I offered you $1 billion at 6% interest to buy Bitcoin right now, would you take it?
I don't have the billion now, but I would take it damn straight.
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple, right? Like, I think it all comes down. The hardest part about this, Dylan, is it's not believing in your business, right? How many businesses believe that they will grow over time 7% a year? Well, there's plenty. 6% a year. It's not that. It's just actually aligning your shareholders so that they're long, so that the shareholders all buy into the mandate. If you can align your shareholders, then the world opens up with options. Then you just have to be prudent about how you manage these things.
Appreciate the response.
Yeah.
Now you want to jump in?
Sure. Thanks so much to Bitcoin Magazine and to CK. Thank you so much, Michael and Greg. Michael, I've looked up to you for so long, and one of my favorite things that you say is Bitcoin is hope. And what I really wanted to touch on is I come from an immigrant background. My family came here wanting the American dream, and I worked in legacy TV, mainstream news for more than 10 years. And I recently quit to focus on Bitcoin. And part of the reason I quit is because for a while I haven't had hope. And I think it's because I've seen the country get so divided. And I truly believe America is in this situation of such division and angst because most people can't envision anything outside of the current system, especially if they don't know about Bitcoin. We are trapped in this paradigm. We've built walls around ourselves and our tribes as defense mechanisms, and we don't even realize that these walls are not real. And I think, learning from people like you, Bitcoin challenges you to justify these walls by offering sort of this consciousness of what can exist outside of the current construct of governance and society. And Bitcoiners realize that there's this huge, rich, abundant world outside of the walls of the current system. And Bitcoin shows me that there's no reason to stay. There's no reason to fight amongst ourselves for the scraps that are left within the walls. And we can build something far greater and far more prosperous and far more accessible outside of them to everyone who wants to take part. And I think, it's taught me that our natural state of being is just freedom. And I think Bitcoin is the ultimate expression of freedom. So I just want to thank you because you've really provided so many people with hope, and Bitcoin is hope.
What makes a difference to you? I was pretty depressed in March myself. and Bitcoin gave me hope. Actually, it really did energize me, and I think it's what made me so enthusiastic about educating the world on this, and continue to educate the world, because I think we have a lot more education to do. It takes a while to deliver a new idea to billions of people. It's not going to happen. Sometimes I think I've been at it as hard as I could for a year and a quarter, and it's like we're just scratching the surface, 1%, 2%. But thank you for everything you do, and I think you put your finger on the most important point here, which is we need, as a group, to go out and educate the entire world on Bitcoin and convey the message that Bitcoin is hope. Everybody's got problems. The bond funds have problems. The financial advisors. Fidelity's got $2 trillion worth of bonds. They got problems. The professional investors have problems. Everybody without a bank account has problems. Everybody that lost a job has problems. Even the politicians have problems. The mayor of New York's trying to figure out how to turn that around. He's looking to Bitcoin. The mayor of Miami. The president of a country. Vladimir Putin's got his problems. Everybody on earth, even the Chinese, have their problems. If they don't like Bitcoin, it's because they don't understand that it's the solution to their problem. Injecting pure digital energy into the civilization, right? It's like bringing fire to the civilization or bringing electricity to the civilization. It can't help but make everything better. But I got to imagine that the first time somebody came into a camp with fire and flaming torches, everybody else recoiled in horror. And the first time someone just said they were going to wire up everybody's house with electricity and they burned somebody's house down or electrocuted someone, there was probably a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt. And now here we are, we're carrying this new torch, digital energy, a new thing, so fundamentally different that people have to discard all of their models, all their portfolio theory, everything, right? All these investors saying, well, I got to be diversified. Well, when you build a building and you're standing out, on a steel beam, you don't diversify the steel beam. Steel is metallic energy. Steel is a higher form of metallic energy than iron, which is a higher form of metallic energy than bronze, which is a better form of metallic energy than wood or stone. And so to build our civilization, we needed steel, and if someone came and said, let's just diversify the skyscraper with some steel and some balsa wood and some clay and some bronze and a little bit of brick here and there, so we'll be safe, you would scream at them, you're going to kill us all. You're going to kill us all. You can't. It's the problem that the institutional investors have is they don't understand that money is technology and that there's a better technology that has obsolesced all their previous technologies. So they have this model of the world that assumes that their materials are defective, Natalie, and because the materials are all defective, none of them work. Then they act suboptimally. If the entire world economy uses a currency that loses 10 or 20% of its value a year, it's kind of like having oxygen or having blood where you're sucking 20% of the oxygen out of the blood every month. It's defective, but they've never lived in a different world. Same with the politicians. And so every single corner of our civilization, there's someone that's got a problem and they're struggling with defective money and defective technology, and they all need to be communicated to a different way. And there is no one way. So I say we should all just decentralize out and swarm everywhere we can. And if you end the day converting someone to Bitcoin so they understand it, it was a good day.
I totally agree, Michael. And I love your analogies. In fact, when you talk about Bitcoin being fire, you sort of got me thinking about that. And I started to think of this analogy of like the US garden or the US system as a garden. And, gardens can be beautiful, right? You can grow things that you need to eat and you can sustain yourself. But in reality, gardens are kind of fake and they can't really compete with nature, right? So they need walls because what you create is inherently unnatural and it would be overrun in a normal environment. And yet there's this sense of stability that we get. And I feel like we're all in this garden and, the control is created within the walls. But then you have one part of the garden that suddenly doesn't have food, and we start fighting over the fact that the good parts of the garden aren't sharing with the other parts. And we argue over little plots of land, and the crops we grow aren't as sweet and nutritious as they once were. And then we have fiat, which is essentially this putrid fertilizer of the garden. And it makes me feel like Bitcoiners have just found this fertile world outside of it. We found, Yosemite, and people are looking at us from inside their walls saying, like, that's not real, that's not safe, and we're here unfazed. We're operating on a wavelength of lightness. We're just, we have hope because we've opted out of the broken system and we're inviting everybody to join us.
Natalie, it's FOSS. Can I just say that was beautiful, and the education process is actually happening a lot behind the scenes. You just never know how it happens, and I just want to share with the listeners that 2 weeks ago I gave a Bitcoin presentation to 45 members of Parliament in Canada. Okay, so people are listening. We have the great educators out there like the Jeff Booths of the world, the Preston Pishes of the world, obviously Michael Saylor. But then for the listeners, put these two names on your list as people you want to listen to in the asset management and risk management business that I've met through Bitcoin Twitter. James Lavish, hedge fund manager, ex-Yale hockey player, and Aaron Segal, hedge fund manager, exceptionally good risk allocator, Midwestern American, both of who understand. So those two guys, James and Aaron, very little amount of followers on Twitter, huge brains and huge risk analysis experience. This education package that the Bitcoin community offers is off the charts. And one final shout out to a friend of mine in Madison, Wisconsin, who is a trauma surgeon in Madison, Wisconsin. Jason Sansone, who I know met you, Natalie, in Miami. He is trying to put together an education package for not just Bitcoin, but finance and the world to understand asset allocation and risk analysis. And he's a trauma surgeon in Madison, Wisconsin. And this is off the edge of his desk that he's putting probably 20 hours of work a week into this project. So God bless all the Bitcoin Twitter guys out there, the Bitcoin Maxis, the partial Maxis, the Jason Lowrys. You guys are educating the world. I'm 58 years old with 3 children that are going to be the benefits of the hard work and the freedom that Bitcoin brings. And so from Canada, I just want to say thank you to everybody. It's not, USA is going to lead the world, but all other countries are going to benefit from it as well.
Very cool. CK, you want to bring anybody else up on stage?
So we have TXMC here. I don't know if you have a question for Michael. If not, maybe P or Alex can jump in.
TXMC, what you got?
Yeah, I guess I just have a question. I've been getting immersed in this space for the last year or so, and something that I've been trying to figure out what I can do myself to try to have an impact. And I think we see this massive disruption coming to the entire legacy financial system in the form of Bitcoin. And I think the thing that I wonder about is, because there's only so many people that I can recruit an orange pill, before the financial system hits the wall, so to speak. And I think, I believe that's going to happen in my lifetime. I think a lot of people would agree with that. And so I guess I'm just kind of wondering what myself, an individual in the Bitcoin space, can do to help minimize the destructive impact of that collision with the wall, so to speak, so that when Bitcoin consumes the financial system and we emerge on the other side with a new world reserve currency, how we can have less ashes remaining to fight over, so to speak? Like, how can we reduce the damage from an individual contributor perspective? How can we make sure that this transition leaves enough remaining and standing on the other side that we can be prosperous in this new system? Like, does my question make sense?
Yeah, I have an opinion, and then Greg will probably have an opinion. My opinion is first of all, we should make clear that there's a win-win proposition for all of the institutions and all the groups and all the people around us. So so you know, what you want to do is you want to show your company how they can win by embracing Bitcoin. And then you want to show your neighbors how they can win by embracing Bitcoin. And then you want to show the mayor of your city how they can win. And then you want to show, your church how they can win, or your club or your university or every institution you're a part of. And then show the state and then show the country. Everybody can win. Bitcoin fixes everything. Bitcoin, is better for every institution, trust, family, company. They don't know how it's better. And the one thing we should try to avoid is creating win-lose scenarios. So, Bitcoin can win and the United States can win. Bitcoin can win and your employer can win. You don't have to say Bitcoin's, you're a bank, I work for a bank, and we're hoping to destroy all the bankers. What you could say is Bitcoin offers banking services. We're a bank. If we plug our bank into Bitcoin, our stock price will double, right? If we plug our city into Bitcoin, our tax rate will be cut in half. If we plug the US dollar into Bitcoin, the US dollar will serve 4 billion other people it's not serving now. Help every politician, every CEO, every investor, everybody figure out how they win, how they benefit, how their life is benefited, how they have hope from Bitcoin. So you certainly, somebody, right? You're in a community, you've got associations, people, right? The real power is going to be in the institutions, right? Like for when the guy that works at Apple Computer convinces Tim Cook that they ought to move $50 billion into Bitcoin and they ought to build Bitcoin support into the iPhone and into iCloud, and they give Apple a vision of giving economic empowerment to 1 billion people via Apple devices, and they create demand for $1 trillion worth of Bitcoin, that will be one pretty powerful orange pill, right? If you orange pill, someone that runs Google or Apple, it's $1 trillion orange pill. If you orange pill the mayor of Austin, Texas, right, it could be a million or 10 or $100 million orange pill. You can orange pill an entire country, but too often, and this is a pet peeve of mine. Too often, the rhetoric is for us to win, our enemies must lose, or it's like we're going to win and you're going to lose. And I think that that's more divisive, and it's not as constructive, and it's not as effective. So instead of telling Vladimir Putin like he should price oil in Bitcoin, which is counter to the interest of the United States, why don't we tell Vladimir Putin sell oil in the US dollar, which is good for the United States, but he can go ahead and buy Bitcoin instead of holding gold in the Russian treasury, and he can convert some of his commodities and other investments into Bitcoin and launch Bitcoin mining businesses, and that'll be good for Russia and good for the US and good for the world, right? Because whenever you have these win-lose scenarios, it's like, if you do this, then we lose, or when Bitcoin succeeds, all the banks will be destroyed. Not a good idea, right? I don't want to destroy the existing world. What I want to do is save it. And if we go out there and we show people how their business is twice as good, their country is twice as good, their family is twice as happy, right? Then we're all good. And I think that there's a way to do that. So everybody's got a different story. Everyone's got a different opportunity. Go orange pill people. And while you're orange pilling them, right? Try to convince them to bring the monetary force, the energy of their institution to bear, right? Everybody has a balance sheet. They could invest in Bitcoin, but they also have a P&L. They do something. And some of them can build what they do into the Bitcoin ecosystem to their benefit and everybody else's. That's what I think. Greg, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, well said again, Michael. That's learning process always on my own part too. I wanted to comment from a Canadian and to be very clear to make sure people on this call understand how much I value Canada's close relationship with the United States. I have no interest in seeing the U.S. fail. Absolutely zero. In fact, I want the U.S. to succeed because Canada's a great country, but we have to be very honest with ourselves. We're a G7 nation, but the reason we're a G7 nation is because we lived right north of the most powerful and rich country in the world. There's a network transfer that needs to take place, and that network transfer takes place over time. And Jeff Booth and I talk about this all the time. We don't want the failure of one system, that being the fiat currency system, at the for the benefit of Bitcoin. We want two parallel systems and a network transfer. And when you do a network transfer, you don't turn one network off and it's supposed that the new network is going to pick up all the slack. So this is something I brought up before. I've lived in the US, and in fact, my roommate from university was killed on 9/11, a very sad day for me and all of America. But it just showed me what a great nation can recover from a absolutely atrocious event. And while I'm not trying to equate the failure of fiat over time to such a brutal event as 9/11, I will tell you that the United States is absolutely the bastion, the last bastion of true free and economic incentive, creative destruction. While there is still some socialization that takes place, our desire in Canada, in my opinion, is to see the success of the United States. And there are enough politicians up here in Canada that believe the same thing. Okay, it's a North American battle. It's a West. It's a battle for the West. And yes, like Steve Covey, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Think win-win. I think that's great advice. Think win-win. Orange pill people with the win-win solution. As Jeff Booth says, there's going to be 100 years of change in the next 10 years. Don't suppose that you know exactly how every change is going to pan out. Just know that you need to be prepared for a technological revolution that's going to accelerate, as I said, or as Jeff says, 100 years of change in the next 10 years.
Who's next?
Yeah, so hey, we got 15 minutes left. So we want to go with Wealth Theory and then Jay, and then we can close it out with last words from Michael and Greg. So Wealth, why don't you go first?
Hear me okay? I just got my headphones on here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to maybe comment on that, on TXMC's question there, because I think we've heard a lot about sort of a top-down move into Bitcoin, where there's like we're talking about how wealthy people can get exposure to Bitcoin and how revolutionary that can be. But as far as orange pilling people, I think we should maybe also touch on what this does for individuals, right? There are a lot of people in the US that don't have any wealth and they don't have any property. And they're like the workforce is quite demoralized. So I think last month it came out that there were 3 million more job vacant and unemployed people in the US. And so we're seeing young people especially opt out of employment because they feel like guys that they didn't have any capital, but when they understood Bitcoin, they were motivated by it because they realized they could actually tangibly improve their lives as individuals. And so when we talk about Bitcoin as hope, it was hope for them and it motivated them. And then so show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome. So these people start to be motivated, they start to work hard, they start to do well. And in doing that, they lift themselves and they lift their community and they lift the people. You can improve your life. And when you improve your life, you improve your communities, you improve the world. And I think that's probably the most powerful orange pill that anyone can give to anybody, is just show people that this is a better way to do things. So that's just all I wanted to say. It wasn't really a question.
You know, when I was at DuPont, you know, they had a motto, better living through technology. It was first better living through chemistry and then better living through technology. But at its core, if you understand Bitcoin as technology, then you can live a better life and you have hope. And you really have a bifurcation. Those that think it's just a speculative asset, for them, it's never going to be more than 1 or 2% trade. It's just a speculation. And those that understand it's technology, if we can just make sure that we communicate as technology, then technology gives you confidence, right? It's like giving you electricity. It's like giving you a sailing ship. It's like giving you